Hello there. Welcome to my review of the first episode of the detective series Columbo, called Murder by the Book. First broadcast on the 15th of September 1971 on NBC. It was written by Stephen Bochco, William Link and Richard Levinson, and directed by someone called Steven Spielberg. Stephen Bochco was born on the 16th of December 1943 in New York. He studied playwriting and theatre at Carnegie Mellon University and graduated in 1966. He began his career with Universal Pictures as a writer and story editor shortly afterwards, working on a variety of TV shows, including this episode of Columbo and many, many others. He would go on to create a host of popular TV dramas, including Hill Street Blues, LA Law, Doogie Howser, and NYPD Blue. Bochco sadly died in 2018 after a 4-year battle with leukemia. He was 74. Richard Levinson was born on August 7th, 1934 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He studied economics at the University of Pennsylvania and served in the US Army from 1957 to 58. William Link was born December 15th, 1933, also in Philadelphia, and got his degree in business at the University of Philadelphia before serving in the US Army from 1956 to 58. Link and Levinson met on their first day of junior high school and began writing together soon afterwards. Both being fans of the Ellery Queen stories, they began writing mystery plays for theatre and radio after their spells in the army. As well as Columbo, they co-created Mannix, Murder, She Wrote with Peter S. Fisher, and brought Ellery Queen to TV for a sadly short single series. Levinson died in 1987 of a heart attack, and in tribute, Link wrote the semi-autobiographical TV movie The Boys in 1991. He was 52. Link died of heart failure on the 27th of December 2020 at the age of 87. Steven Spielberg is one of the most famous directors in the world, so I'll let you do your own research on him. This wasn't his first directing job, but it was very early in his career, and shortly after this he directed DUEL, which was the stepping stone for him to the career he has now. This episode, like every episode, stars Peter Falk as Lieutenant Columbo. Falk was born September 16th, 1927 in New York. At age 3, his right eye was removed because of a cancerous growth, and he wore an artificial eye for most of his life. He served as a cook in the Merchant Marines in World War II, then went on to gain a degree in literature and political science in 1951. He later joined a community theatre group and lied his way into a professional acting class, but was allowed to remain in the class once his lie had been discovered. From there, he began performing in off-Broadway and later Broadway productions, as well as appearing in films, gaining an Oscar nomination for his first major role in the low-budget thriller Murder, Inc. He would continue in smaller roles in films throughout the 60s before taking on Columbo for the first time in 1968. He agreed to take on Columbo on a semi-regular basis as part of the Mystery Wheel format, which would allow him time to pursue other work. He would go on to play Columbo on and off for the next 35 years. He became good friends with John Cassavetes and would work on many of Cassavetes' films, as well as giving a star turn with Alan Arkin in The In-Laws and a memorable cameo in The Princess Bride, as well as many other films. His final film was the Nicolas Cage movie Next in 2007. He was also an accomplished sketch artist and chess player. Falk died in 2011 due to complications arising from pneumonia and Alzheimer's. He was 83. Murder by the Book begins with no theme tune, a staple of the Columbo series. This episode opens with a soundscape of a typewriter, and we see a figure typing. The sound continues over the next few shots of a car pulling into a parking space and a hand reaching for a gun in the glove compartment. Jack Cassidy steps out of the car. In the office of the man writing, there is a knock at the door. When he goes to answer it, Jack Cassidy is there with the gun. The man is not scared. Jack Cassidy is his writing partner, Ken Franklin, and he is Jim Ferris. Not that I wish to criticise Steven Spielberg, even a young Steven Spielberg, but as this is basically a new mystery series, I think I would have liked it if you hadn't seen Jack Cassidy until his partner calls his bluff. At this point, we don't know this isn't a whodunit, and so I think it would have been fun to have a little fake out as if this looked like it was a typical mystery show, and that this was the actual murder. Jack Cassidy was born on the 5th of March 1927 in New York. He had an extensive Broadway career as a musical performer and many appearances on a variety of television shows, including appearing as the murderer on 3 occasions in Columbo. He was married twice, first to Evelyn Ward, who is the mother of his son, the teen idol David Cassidy, and then to Shirley Jones, with whom he had 3 more sons, actors Sean and Patrick, as well as Ryan. His granddaughter is Katie Cassidy, who is David's daughter. He sadly died in 1976 when he fell asleep on his couch holding a lit cigarette, which ignited the couch and set fire to the apartment. He was 49. Jim Ferris is ending his writing partnership with Ken as he is tired of doing all the work on their Mrs Melville mystery novels. Ken, having given up the writing after the first couple of books, is content to be the public face of their partnership. Jim is tired of doing all the work and only getting half the credit, and Ken is not happy with this situation as he lacks the talent and work ethic, so they have been at odds with each other. But he says he's there to make it up to Jim and invites him to see his new cabin. He suggests Jim tell his wife that he's working late at the office. He surreptitiously leaves his cigarette lighter on the desk, and as they go towards Ken's car, Ken hands Jim a list of names, mistaking it for a list of things he wants from the office. He takes the list back and says he's forgotten his lighter, and so returns to the office alone, where he proceeds to trash the office. For audiences who knew nothing about Columbo, this is the first indication that something is not quite right. Not just with the character, but with the way the episode is structured, as we see him do it. If he's the killer, they've just given a huge clue to us. Of course, we know now that we always see the killer from the start, but it must have been quite intriguing for a new audience. So they make their way to the cabin, with Ken stopping off to pick up groceries, while Jim stays in the car. Ken flirts with the woman who runs the store, as well as giving her a signed copy of their latest book. He then makes a call to Jim's wife, telling her he's already at the cabin and that he's just left Jim at the office, having patched things up with him. After they arrive at the cabin, Ken suggests that Jim call his wife with their prearranged excuse. As he is on the phone to her, Ken shoots him dead, and the first act comes to an end. Jim Ferris was played by Martin Milner. Milner was born December the 28th, 1931, in Detroit, Michigan. He began acting in school and with his family moved to LA when he was a teenager. After his first film appearance in Life with Father, he contracted polio and spent a year and a half recovering. He then had several minor and major film and TV roles over the next few years. After a spell in the army, he returned to film and television, as well as regular roles in Route 66 and Adam 12. He continued to act in television roles into the late 90s. He died on the 6th of September 2015 of heart failure. He was 83. So the second act starts with Jim's wife, Joanna, calling the police to Jim's office, and she and they are going over the crime scene there. They are sceptical whether Jim is dead, as there's no body, and she's in shock, so she goes to get a drink and is met by Columbo. In this episode we get the first few Columbo trademarks: the raincoat, the scruffy hair, the rumpled suit, and the cigar, as well as the famous "just one more thing," or a variation on the phrase. They're all present from the beginning. There's still a few things to introduce, which I'll highlight in future episodes as they occur. Some of these come from the makers of the show, and some directly from Falk, indicating just how much of a collaborative effort it was to create this character. So he shows her his badge, reassures her, and offers to drive her home. While there, he offers to make her an omelette. This relaxes her and disarms her, while he gently questions her. This is the first indication of Columbo's brilliance. He's noticed something doesn't look quite right at the crime scene, but he's not entirely sure of what that is. He is pretty sure that the wife isn't involved, because her story wouldn't really make sense if she was. So he's on the lookout for other suspects and is now probing her for information about the victim's writing partner. He finds out that their partnership is ending, and also that Ken doesn't do any of the writing, and that Jim kept copious notes of all his ideas. It's at this point Ken turns up at the Ferris house and he and Columbo meet. This is a fairly low-key first meeting, as they only briefly share the screen together. But it's just enough time for Ken to tell Columbo he last saw Jim at his office. He's been at his cabin, and he thinks that Jim was killed by the mob because he's working on a new factual expose on mob families. There's a moment in all Columbo episodes where Columbo knows exactly who did it. It's rarely revealed to the audience when this moment exactly is, but I try to look out for it when I think it is, and I'm pretty sure it's here, his first meeting. Ken makes the classic mistake of providing information without a prompt. This is the first murderer mistake of the series, and I'll be on the lookout for others. He follows this up with the second murderer mistake, and takes Columbo to the office to give him a list that Jim supposedly made of the mafia family's names. It's the list of names that he handed to Jim earlier on, so we know it will have both their fingerprints on it. And that as Jim had no recognition of the names on the list when he saw it, he wasn't really working on a book about the mafia. He's being far too helpful, and as a result, Columbo is now definitely onto him. Columbo now starts asking him about the things that are bothering him. Why they took the body. Why the list Jim wrote is folded in the particular way. And why Ken drove all the way back from his cabin rather than taking a plane if he was in a hurry. Ken gives explanations which, as we'll see later on, is usually just more fuel for Columbo. But in this case, with the exception of the missing body, are fairly reasonable explanations. They leave, and Ken, who has had Jim's body in the boot of his car the whole time, which is why he really drove home, puts it on his own front lawn, then calls Columbo to tell him what he's discovered. Columbo turns up with other officers, and while they deal with the body, Columbo grills Ken. He wants to know who now owns Jim's rights to the books, it's Joanna the wife, and why the body was left on Ken's lawn. Ken says it was a misplaced warning as the mob didn't know Ken had nothing to do with the new book. Ken's doing pretty good here with his explanations, but then it's a tiny detail that really trips him up. He opened his mail while on the phone to Columbo, and Columbo asks why he did that. After just finding the murdered corpse of his friend and long-term writing partner. Ken says he was just looking for something to do, but Columbo isn't buying it. Our third murderer mistake, giving a bad explanation to a detail that they've overlooked. This establishes another common plot theme in Columbo. It's often, in fact more often than not, the little details that Columbo picks up on. Not things that will necessarily prove his case, but things that make him deeply suspicious and helps him focus in on who the murderer is, so he can then attempt to find the more incriminating evidence. Ken then gives Columbo a comically large pile of Mrs Melville books to read, giving us our fourth murderer mistake, being too nice. The next day, Columbo speaks to an insurance agent about Jim's life insurance policy and who benefits. It turns out it's Ken. After this scene, we cut to Ken at the theatre with a young lady. They're coming out of a mystery play, and he claims to have worked out the killer in the first act, further displaying his egotism in the minds of the audience. As they are leaving, Ken is called back by Lily, the grocery store owner from the route to the cabin, who he finds out is in town to do a little shopping and to do a little blackmailing of him, as she saw Jim in the car on the way to the cabin when he was supposed to be in his office. He takes her out to dinner and agrees to pay her $15,000 for her silence, while also trying to romance her into keeping his secret. The next day, Columbo turns up at Ken's house as Ken is being interviewed by a journalist and outrageously flirting with that journalist. Columbo is there to return all the books, and this really should have given Ken an indication Columbo isn't as dumb as he acts. He's managed to read 15 novels in no more than 2 days. Columbo notices 2 bottles of champagne, and when Ken tells him he's off to the cabin again, Columbo naturally asks who he's going with. He says he's going alone and is perfectly capable of drinking 2 bottles of champagne. Of course, this isn't true, as he plans to meet with Lily. Lily is played by Barbara Colby. Colby was born the 2nd of July 1939 in New York and began her career in theatre before her big break in Columbo. She went on to appear in 2 films and on a variety of television shows. In 1975, while walking to her car after an acting class with fellow actor James Kiernan, she was shot and killed by 2 unknown men. The killers were never caught. She was 36. At Lily's, they have dinner. He has managed to get her a bit tipsy, but she still doesn't trust him when he says they should take a boat out on the lake and go swimming. It's a very sloppy move on his part, as he's being very obvious. But then the next thing he does is hit her on the back of the head with a champagne bottle before taking a boat out onto the lake to dump her body. The next day, the police find the body, and Columbo is there. He intends to grill Ken, and he finds a champagne cork at Lily's house. And he knows Ken knew Lily far more than he is admitting to. Columbo then goes to Joanna and tells her he knows Ken did it, but needs her help to prove it. So he asks her to tell him everything about their partnership. Joanna Ferris is played by Rosemary Forsyth. Forsyth was born on the 6th of July 1943 in Montreal and studied acting after spending some time as a model. Her first film was in 1965's Shenandoah, playing James Stewart's daughter. Various film and television roles followed over the next 40 years, appearing in everything from Mannix to Monk. Her last on-screen appearance was in the TV movie Sweet Nothing in My Ear with Jeff Daniels and Marlee Matlin in 2008. She is 78. In future episodes, it's unlikely this sort of scene would exist, as she has already given him the vital clue he needs earlier on in the show. Or that clue would have been saved until this scene, because, based on what we know of the character, he would have remembered this information from earlier. The next day, Ken arrives at the office to find the police, including Columbo, there preventing the movers from clearing the office of all of Ken's things. Ken is now openly hostile towards Columbo, and Columbo tells him he's going to arrest Ken for murder. All the little things pointed Columbo in the right direction, but the final clue was finding one of Jim's notes, which detailed the exact way that he was killed. When Jim spoke about having deja vu about going to the cabin earlier on in the show, he was getting it because he wrote down the very scenario years earlier. Columbo explains that Ken isn't a writer at all. He's just been playing at one for years, but hasn't written a word. That's why the second murder was so sloppy, and the first wasn't, because he didn't come up with the first murder. Ken has been caught and admits it, but adds that, ironically, this was his idea, the only good one he ever came up with, and he had no idea that Jim had made a note of it. This is a great opening episode. It establishes the inverted mystery element really well by seeing the killer play out his entire murder plan. It introduces Columbo and some of his quirks, shows how he deals with murderers, and has a satisfying conclusion. The music is a little overbearing, but that is a criticism that stays with Columbo for a while. They never quite get the music to fit the tone of the show. Perhaps because the show is unlike anything that's ever been on television. As I said earlier, I wouldn't wish to criticise Spielberg's direction, but it certainly feels like a filmmaker finding his feet, as he gets a lot of different camera work in the episode, and there is perhaps an over-reliance on extreme close-ups and zooms that can be a little jarring. There are some really nice tracking and dolly shots that are incredibly rare for TV of this time, so I guess you have to take the bad with the good. There's nothing that ruins the episode, but there's a world of difference between this Spielberg and the Spielberg who made Jaws just a few years later. All the cast are perfect. Falk is peerless, already very comfortable in his role, but Jack Cassidy is so good at playing the ego-driven, womanizing slimeball, and although they don't get a huge amount of screen time, Rosemary, Forsyth and Barbara Colby are perfectly cast. Forsyth is earnest and innocent, while Colby is just desperate enough to be believable, in a part that could easily have come off as a character acting a little too dumb. I'll be rating each episode out of 5, and this one, for me, is a 4 out of 5. Not the best, but very good. Thank you. Goodbye.